Welcome, my friends. Today, let's talk about track days, and specifically my first ever track day. This video is more for the newbies out there, those who want to get involved in track days. I want to teach you from what I've learned, the things I did right, and more importantly, the things I did wrong, so that you can have an enjoyable, fruitful, safe, and adventurous time on the racetrack. So, first of all, my first track day was June 28th, 2020, almost 2 years ago at Laguna Seca with Hooked on Driving. And this is at the beginning of the pandemic. This is when I was going crazy from lockdown and being lonely, and I was just super unhappy. I actually made another YouTube video right up here about that time in my life and how I got through it. But I started tracking essentially as an outlet. I got to hang out with people, hang out with friends, make new friends, enjoy one of my greatest passions, etc. And because it was beginning of the pandemic, there was no coach in the car. I was also not allowed to ride along in the car with coaches, obviously because at that time we were very careful and cautious, mask, distance, all that stuff. So it was only lead follow, which had pros and cons to it. But overall, a very positive experience, right? Because now I have been hooked and I'm constantly tracking any opportunity I can. So let's go over the things I did right and the things I did wrong. First up, under the things I did right was choosing the right organization. I chose Hooked on Driving, which is a more, I guess, expensive, safety-focused organization. They run a very tight ship, and I think that's excellent for beginners because, I mean, this was like a really expensive event. It was $500, I think, and that's for a novice because you get a coach, whereas if you were intermediate, I think it was maybe $400, something like that. But the reason that I think this was so important is that when you first start tracking safety, I mean, safety is always the number one priority, but when you first start off, you're gonna be doing things a little bit suboptimally. Your track awareness isn't gonna be quite as developed. And for that reason, having a really safety-focused organization that spends a lot of time teaching and getting you through the process in the best way possible is very much worth it, I would say. So compared to other organizations that are a lot cheaper, people are expensive, right? So these safety systems are gonna increase the price, they're gonna increase the required personnel, etc. So sure, you can do Laguna Seca for $250, but you're not gonna have the same level of focus on safety, and I think that for a beginner is a big no-no. The second thing I did right was really focusing on coaching and being humble, because, I mean, all of us car guys, we all have our egos. We all want to think that we're the best drivers in the world. We're Art Senna reincarnated and whatnot. But the reality is you go to the track because you want to have fun and you want to improve your driving technique. And if you are one of those guys that's too headstrong, you have this big ego, you're like, hey, I know what I'm doing. Those are the guys that have offs on the track. They wreck their car. They have those kinds of issues. Those that are more humble and that say, hey, you know, I love driving, I love cars, but I have a lot to learn. Those are those who progress the fastest, for sure, hands down. The other thing I did right was getting track day insurance. And this is more for ease of mind than anything. And I no longer do track day insurance. I only did track day insurance at my first 2 track days. After that, I stopped. I'm not saying that you should stop, but part of the reason I stopped was that this car is pretty cheap and easily replaceable. And it gave me the peace of mind on that first track day, and that alone is really worth it, right? Because the first track day you go to, especially if this is your one and only car, it's pretty nerve-wracking because if something happens, you're kind of shit out of luck. And that brings me to the things I did wrong, because things could have gone really, really wrong on that first track day. And actually, let me just show you a clip of me going down the corkscrew and almost eating it. Yeah, so that was a close call. That was a high sphincter tone moment, as we would say in the operating room. And let me tell you why that happened. So I did autocross for a couple years, and in autocross, I did the pedal dance in the FR-S. And the pedal dance 100% completely disables both traction control as well as stability control. And that is important in autocross because you want to develop your driver's skill. No one really told me, and I didn't really think through it. I shouldn't really say that no one told me. I need to take responsibility. It was on me for being a dum-dum to not think that, hey, I should probably have traction control or stability control at my first ever track day. In my head, I was like, oh no, this is just like autocross. let's 100% disable everything. So before every single group, including like every single run group, even my first run group, I did the pedal dance. I 100% disabled traction and stability control. And that's why you have moments like that where I almost ate shit going down the corkscrew. Now luckily, because I have experience with autocross, because I am comfortable with this car, I was able to catch it, save it, and not eat shit straight into the wall. Now, the funny thing is that afterwards, the coach didn't even ask me whether I had traction control enabled or not. He said, hey, are you okay? Like, what went on there? Have you learned? Like, etc. It wasn't until the end of the track day, when we were debriefing, that he made it clear that, oh, yeah, you should probably have traction control enabled on your first ever track day. And that was news to me, which is funny in hindsight. So learn from my mistake. The other issue there is that I had these really old heat cycle tires that I used to park outside here in Vegas, and the heat also just made them really dry and just they were not appropriate for track use, to be frank. So I was sliding around a lot that day. There are a lot of clips of me getting sideways, and again, because of this car and because of my experience with autocross, it wasn't an issue, but if I wasn't as comfortable with this car, it could have become a big issue, and then that track day insurance would have had to kick in, unfortunately. So that's the first thing that I definitely did wrong. The second thing I did wrong is that I wasn't as diligent about preparing my car and bringing the necessary supplies. So it ended up working out because for most of us on our first track day, we're not pushing the car nearly as hard as we're going to in the future because we're still getting used to the track, etc. Actually, one other point I want to add here, which is that it was good I went to Laguna Seca, a track that I was very comfortable with, because I played it countless times on Gran Turismo 1, Gran Turismo 2, 3, and 4 as a kid growing up. So I knew the track layout. The downside of Laguna Seca is that there are walls, so if you mess up, I mean, you can eat shit, and there were some people that did eat shit at these events. Something like Button Willow or I guess Thunder Hill is probably a little bit safer in that regard of not having as many walls. But anyways, going back to prepping your car, I didn't bring the necessary supplies, and again, it was fine that first track day, but I remember my third track day, like, I had some serious issues with my brakes. That first track day, I did get my brake fluid flushed. I think I was running my OEM stock street pads, not actual track pads, which again, was fine because I wasn't pushing the car that hard on my first ever track day. And I think I didn't even have my oil cooler, or maybe I did have an oil cooler. I don't remember whether I had my oil cooler or not by that point. But I was lucky. If something happened to my car, I would have kind of been shit out of luck. I mean, I did have family in the Bay Area about an hour and a half to 2 hours away from Laguna Seca, so not the end of the world. But, you know, I live in Vegas, so I drove 8 hours. You know, in reality, I should have had a jack and jack stands and extra brake pads and extra oil and all that stuff. I think I only brought extra oil and nothing else. But overall, my biggest regret with track days is just not getting started sooner. I think at the beginning I was very hesitant to do so because it is pretty pricey, and I think for those who are on a budget, like when I was in med school, I was broke AF. And autocross is way, way, way cheaper, like an order of magnitude cheaper compared to track days. And for that reason, I started with autocross, and I think it was good because I learned car control basics. But once I started making some money after med school, man, I just wish that I started tracking sooner because there is nothing quite like track days. I say that there are only two main things that get me into a flow state in life that I've discovered so far. One of them was operating back when I was doing plastic surgery, and number two is going on the racetrack and just pushing the car to the limit and having a great time. So anyway, my friends, I hope you found that video useful. If you liked the video, then please press that like button. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in that next one. What's up, man? How was the flight?
Good.
Welcome to Las Vegas.
Man, it's hot here.
That it is.